Well, thanks everybody for coming out. Sorry about a slightly late start here, but we had everybody trapped in the back for a few minutes. This is obviously a terrific opportunity to host three leading members of the United States government on a topic that is quickly emerging as really a forward-leaning thrust of American policy. It's, of course, always been there, but innovation and the United States' role therein has really jumped up in recent times as the leading edge on a lot of our international economic engagement. But as always at CSIS, for those that have been here before, I have to start off with the rules and regulations, which is just in case there's some type of emergency, which we're not expecting. You see Murray, you'll see me, you'll see other CSIS staffers. Follow us outside the door in case there's some type of an emergency when we're here. We'll be your emergency leaders just in case something happens. Again, not that we're expecting. The big events have already taken place with the defense officials earlier today, so this should be a little bit simpler on that front. In August 2015, Secretary of State John Kerry articulated a vision of U.S. economic engagement with Asia that was focused on innovation. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it's not exactly a new concept, but however, we've seen it become more sharply focused in recent months. It led to the American Innovation Roadshow that we'll cover today, which is actually very relevant both for Murray Hebert's program as well as my own. In September of last year, I was asked to lead a new U.S.-India Innovation Forum, and we're just in the process of getting the steering committee up and running and getting that program launched. And of course, Murray is co-lead on a major new CSIS initiative, the Asia Economic Strategy Commission, which is co-chaired by Ambassador Charlene Barshevsky, Governor John Huntsman, and the CEO of Chubb Corporation, Evan Greenberg. So innovation is part and parcel with a lot of the work that Murray's program and mine do here at CSIS. So let me lead off by telling you a bit about our esteemed panelists, and then I'll hand it off to them. Ambassador David Thorne, August 2013, was appointed senior advisor, meant to inject economic issues more strongly into our foreign policy. Prior to that was ambassador to Italy, and on his most recent, before that, we co-founded Advisor Investments. So he's got a strong private sector mentality as well. He recently has just come back from a visit where he stopped in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines as part of the roadshow. Next to him is Ambassador Charles Rivkin, Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. His office is really the primary link for foreign policy related to the business community. Ambassador to France and Monaco before that, but also private sector backing before he became a diplomat, leading firms such as the Jim Henson Company and WildBrain. He was just back from a four-city visit to India and joined by the colleague next to him, Ziad Haider. Ziad earlier this year became Special Representative for Commercial and Business Affairs at the Department of State. He'd been in the policy planning staff before that, and before joining State Department was at White & Case looking at investor-state dispute settlement, sanctions, CFIUS review, and all. So the three have great props on diplomatic, but also have great experience in the business community, which is exactly what we want to see for innovation discussion. But now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Murray Hebert. Murray is a Senior Fellow and Deputy Director of the Chair of Southeast Asia Studies here at CSIS. And he and I both also have a little bit in the private sector, having both worked at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce together in earlier avatars. But let me hand it over first to Ambassador David Thorne to lead off the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's great to be here. And I'll try to be brief, and then we'll look forward to my colleagues and also questions. First thing is, when I came back from Italy, and I've been a long-time friend of the Secretary of State, John Kerry, one of the things that he's wanted to focus on, and part of his mandate as Secretary, is to energize economic diplomacy, and as part of what he does, what we've done in the state. And giving a little bit of a frame to that, we call it the shared prosperity agenda, which is the sense of encouraging inclusive economic growth around the world as the middle class ascends around the world, and as a way of establishing or maintaining our relationship with an economic relationship with the rest of the world. And the other thing I wanted to say, even though we've talked about the word innovation, is certainly on my leg of the trip, which was the three countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, a lot of it was about entrepreneurship. And so, as obviously the two are very much related, but in terms of entrepreneurship, it's a word that that is not all that necessarily that understood. It's a word that we use a lot out there in the White House and the State Department. It's something that is very much of an aspirational part of what the rest of the world sort of most likes about us. But it is not necessarily an understood term. And I think part of this voyage that we took, this leg at least of the Innovation Roadshow, was to help sort of inform ourselves, our embassies and other kinds of things of what this word really means. What does it mean to be an entrepreneur? There were three basic objectives to what we were trying to do. One was public diplomacy. As I mentioned, entrepreneurship is really the most aspired to American brand, and we certainly in doing this trip wanted to emphasize and bring emphasis to the importance to the importance we give to that, and also the importance that others ascribe, countries ascribe to it. So by the presence of this Innovation Roadshow, they really, we got a lot of press, and we emphasized the U.S. brand. By the way, I just want to mention the companies that came with us were IBM, MetLife, eBay, Endeavor, Coursera, the largest online education organization in the country now, GE, UL, Google, especially the Loon project, and Qualcomm. And I see my colleague who came with me, Susie Armstrong, who was there, who represented Qualcomm. And finally, NEA, which is the largest venture capital firm actually in the country. So we had you can see a broad range of representatives of entrepreneurship and innovation on this trip. The second of the three objectives is the exercise of policy framing, because one of the things that while governments and these countries want to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem, they sort of want to know how, and we try to really emphasize the pieces of that of the policy environment that is needed to support the creation of a healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem. Things like just digital connectivity, labor laws, fintech, financial technologies, starting with credit cards, but just mobile banking, all kinds of things like that that are essential to a healthy economic, to a healthy the economy. And the education, and particularly STEM, but also the old idea of technology transfer, and finally, but not unimportantly, the problems or the ease of starting a business. Frankly, somebody just turned that on. Thank you very much. Maybe no one can hear me. The ease of starting a business, and frankly, the ease of ending a business. So these are things that are not necessarily that well understood over there, but we tried to emphasize with the ministers and the government officials we met just how important it is for the governments to try to work on these elements of a policy environment which would help develop the environment to encourage entrepreneurship. The other thing we've tried to emphasize constantly was on innovation, that it's, entrepreneurship's not just about innovation, but it's really about job creation. Because, all net new jobs over the last 10 years in the U.S. have come from new business, and the OECD says the same thing is true around the world. And I think governments kind of get that, at least the governments we were exposed to, but they're not at all sure how to get, how to make that happen in their countries. The other thing we did is we energized our missions to understand how to create and to encourage a dialogue with the young entrepreneurs in the country between our missions and the groups that were trying to get their entrepreneurial efforts going. We also connected directly with incubators and other kinds of environments like that. It's amazing how many within the countries we went to, because they've all got youth populations of 70% are under 35, just how much entrepreneurial energy there is in creating incubators, hackathons, all kinds of devices like that that get this kind of environment going. And finally, just the companies that accompany the companies that accompany us, they got a better sense of what these countries were doing, what the environments were that they took part in, and just even created some opportunities to create actual engagement or investment between the groups that accompany us and some of the kids that were in we met along the way. Again, I went to 3 countries. Indonesia, just sum up very quickly, it's very much a mix of old elite structures and vibrant new incubators. It's not exactly sure how that's all going to sort out as the time goes on, but it's very clear that there's a growing number of very active young people that want to create the kind of thing we have in Silicon Valley. One of the things that came out of that, one of the startups that had been tremendously successful out there was an Uber type of company that's called Gojek, that was actually a motorcycle taxi service. So you would, it all works the same way Uber does, but you get on the back of a taxi, get on the back of a motorcycle with a helmet, and it's the only way to get through Jakarta traffic. It's been a huge success, and they've received over $100 million from an American Silicon Valley, venture firm to develop that business. It's just very interesting to see something like that going out there. Vietnam is, of course, an enormously vibrant place. We went both to Hanoi and to Ho Chi Minh City. They really get it. The ministers get what it's going to take to create an entrepreneurial environment and ecosystem there. They have all kinds of startup activity, incubators, young groups of people getting together to, exchange ideas, places where, there's a synergistic mix between real estate developers and entrepreneurs, which is giving, they've developed these kinds of centers where everybody, can rent little spaces and begin to create ideas. It's very interesting to see how they're beginning to adapt to this new way of thinking. Lastly, the Philippines, where was probably the least developed of the entrepreneurial environment, but there's some programs. One that came through USA that was called the Stride program, that really was teaching the Filipinos how to commercialize research. And that was, a very successful government-sponsored type of program that, the U.S. Program that helped do that. I guess I just want to also mention what was going on there. One of the infrastructure problems that exist both in Indonesia and the Philippines is this environment of archipelago. It's very hard to sort of create an infrastructure that connects these islands. I mean, in Indonesia, there are 17,000 islands. And Google has developed this Loon project, which is to bring sort of a type of satellite up 60,000 feet with a balloon and bridge the gap of not having to lay wires and other kinds of things like that. And that seems to be taking off and actually solving an infrastructure problem of connectivity for those islands. So there's a lot of dynamic activity that's going on out there, and I certainly think that our government effort to energize the sector has been, was certainly first time around, very successful in what we tried to do.
Great, thanks, Ambassador Thorne. Assistant Secretary Rivkin, please.
Well, thank you very much. And I have to say that one of the best parts for me about having the chance to work at the U.S. State Department is to work with friends like my friend David Thorne, who was brought in with me and with a handful of others to deliver, as the ambassador was saying, on Secretary Kerry's heartfelt belief that economic policy is foreign policy, and foreign policy is economic policy. They're one and the same. And so for me, it's always a pleasure to be here at CSIS, where I've been able to present a few times in the past. Topics are always timely, and the debate and conversations are always lively, and I look forward to that. And as Ambassador Thorne pointed out, and Special Representative Ziad Haider will outline in a few minutes, we embarked on the American Innovation Roadshow to promote innovation and economic growth across the region. Ambassador Thorne mentioned the ASEAN countries he visited. I visited in India, and I'll talk about that component of the trip. But our hope is this is phase one, and we're going to learn from our experiences, and our hope is before the end of the Secretary's term, we'll have spanned out across 15 different cities and really have left this, the Secretary will have this as a legacy during his time at the State Department. But my role on this round of the Innovation Roadshow was to lead a diverse delegation of U.S. companies, including GE, First Solar, AES, and a company called 8 Minute Energy, among others, to India, to engage officials and business leaders on innovation in clean energy. And we were accompanied by representatives from California Governor Jerry Brown's office and academia to foster linkages at the state and institutional levels as well, in addition to the dialogue that we would have on a government-to-government basis in New Delhi. And we chose to focus on clean energy for several reasons here. First and foremost, climate change is arguably the existential challenge of our generation. There's almost 200 nations, including the United States and India, recognized this last December at COP21 in Paris and announced their commitment to reducing carbon emissions and building up their renewable energy bases. And in India, the case for addressing climate change and building economic growth and bringing affordable and sustainable energy to the world's fastest growing population couldn't be clearer. And recognizing this, the Modi administration has set an ambitious target to reach 175 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2022. And now with 80% of this required infrastructure yet to be built, this is a significant opportunity for American companies and research institutions to showcase innovative technological and environmental solutions and challenges. And we were coming into India on a wave of great potential and opportunity, but we were also wanted to make sure we could achieve tangible results on this trip. Henry Ford, one of America's great entrepreneurs, put it best when he said, "You can't build a reputation on what you're going to do." Well, in a country where so much needs to be done, we knew it was not enough to sit with the top government officials in Delhi and articulate goals and dreams and great intentions. So we met with many of the economic actors who were actively involved in bringing the Indian economy forward, especially in the clean energy arena, and those included entrepreneurs and India's state leaders. And I was really impressed by what I saw. Just to give you some examples, when I was in Gurgaon, we went to a clean energy storage factory, and I met with a young American entrepreneur in Gurgaon who builds and operates affordable solar microgrids in villages. Now, these microgrids, or nanogrids as he called them, cost less than $1,000 apiece, and they bring electricity to remote villages where each family of the 12 that each microgrid powers gets solar power for 2 lights in a house and 1 charger that will give 7 hours of light during the night in these houses. These guys that are benefiting from this entrepreneur's activities are way off the grid. And I heard stories of how children in the homes never dreamed they'd actually be able to do homework at night thanks to this. It was just incredible. And we met biomass companies that are creating clean burning pellets made out of agricultural waste. We met innovative, cutting-edge battery storage businesses that are going to be key to any power grid efficiency. And we were able to help engage those businesses with the people in our delegation. When I was in Gujarat, I went to IIM Ahmedabad Center for Innovation, Incubation, and Entrepreneurship. And we saw an incubator with clean tech companies and met some of the young entrepreneurs. Met a woman engineer who creates sustainable roofing panels for slums and villages made from recyclable agriculture and packaging waste. It was unbelievable to witness. And in every incubator we visited, members of our delegation, especially the solar companies that were part of our team, identified tangible commercial investment opportunities. And I also mentioned we went beyond the established hubs like Delhi and Mumbai this time to visit states and other capitals. We met with chief ministers of Gujarat and Andhra Pradesh and the de facto chief minister of Telangana, the new state, and they were all eager for private investment. And Prime Minister Modi has increasingly devolved federal funding to the states, and he's also encouraged the states, the Indian states, to actively compete with each other in what he believes is a race to the top for foreign investment. Fascinating to watch. The new dynamic, because they're all paying very close attention to World Bank's listing of ease of doing business, and what was deemed cooperative federalism by Prime Minister Modi was clearly seen as competitive federalism by the states, and it really pushed each of the states to higher and higher standards. Absolutely terrific. They stressed their commitment to protecting intellectual property rights for investors and entrepreneurs, and they made it clear they were eager to help steer India away from carbon fuels to a cleaner, sustainable future. Now, for them, the stakes were enormous. Many of these states have populations that outnumber major countries, and the large-scale needs that go with that. They not only have the motivation, these states do, but they have the autonomy to do something about it. And so we made positive connections. For example, Governor Brown's office invited several technology incubators, including India's T-Hub in Hyderabad, which is extremely impressive, to join the California Innovation Hub Network. And the California State Office also proposed partnership with key state leaders in India to learn from California's successes in reducing air pollution and in maintaining high economic growth. But in every meeting, we experienced a very refreshing way. Exactly, we were able to see what binds our two countries closer and closer together, a shared passion for innovation and entrepreneurship. In fact, Americans and Indian entrepreneurs have become part of a shared culture, if you will, that reveres innovation. And many tech entrepreneurs of Indian origin have contributed to U.S. global leadership in this space. And as Indian ambassador to the United States, Arun Singh has pointed out, many U.S.-educated Indians are bringing back ideas developed in California to India. He estimates that more than $6 billion has flowed from startups in India, with most of it coming from Silicon Valley. And it's critical that we continue to support these people-to-people ties between our two countries and this growing vibrancy, not only in the clean energy space, but across all sectors. And Thomas Edison said that if we did all the things we were capable of, we would astound ourselves. Well, India is on the verge of astounding itself and the world, and the United States is ready to be a stakeholder and partner in that future. And I think that this leg of our American Innovation Roadshow ended up being a complete success. Ziad?
Thanks very much. I'll just start at the onset and say thanks to CSIS, a crack Asia team all around, spanning Southeast Asia, South Asia, Northeast. They don't pay me to say this. It's just me. But as we, as a government, try to think holistically, strategically about Asia, CSIS has been a great thought partner because they've situated their programming in a way that we can actually talk about Asia in a South, Southeast, Northeast way instead of the divisions that creep in typically in those conversations. So just to add on to what David, Ambassador Thorne and Rivkin both shared, I just want to situate the roadshow in a larger policy landscape for you all. And essentially, I'll divide my comments into the prelude and the postlude. The prelude is that the actual origins of this roadshow were in a speech that the Secretary of State gave in Singapore last fall at the Singapore Management University on the theme of partners in prosperity. And what he laid out in that speech essentially was U.S. economic strategy in Asia, built around 4 key pillars: trade, investment, development, and connectivity. The trade piece doesn't need too much elaboration. As you all know, we're focused on TPP, which currently has 12 countries, but assuming others are able to meet the standards set therein, the high standards, could foreseeably include others. And the ultimate goal, obviously, in the Asia-Pacific is the free trade area for the Asia-Pacific. So there's a very clear trade agenda in Asia, and it's a no-brainer given that 6 of our top 15 trade partners are in Asia, actually. So that's one part of the economic agenda. The second was investment, where the Secretary spoke about both the sheer quantity of U.S. investment in Asia, but also the quality, and that's an important value proposition to highlight that our companies bring. Some of you who focus on Southeast Asia may be aware of the fact that U.S. companies investing more than $500,000 in Burma, for example, file a report with the State Department outlining the due diligence to do on labor, on human rights, on the environment. So there's sort of a quantity and a quality argument, and I'll just come back to that briefly. The third pillar was development, and you're all familiar with some of the programming we're doing across Asia. Again, on the Southeast Asia side, Lower Mekong Initiative is one highlighted program. In India, we got to see firsthand the terrific work USAID is doing in the clean energy space. And the last pillar he talked about was connectivity, both in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of people to people. And the main initiative that encompasses that is US-ASEAN Connect, that I'll speak briefly about at the end of my remarks in the postlude part. So this economic strategy in Asia of trade, investment, development, and connectivity, within that, you should think of the roadshow part as situated under the sort of investment point, and within that specifically, the quality of our companies, the brand, the value proposition that American companies bring to the region, and specifically in the space of innovation. And so to actually showcase that and to share that in the region is what led the Secretary to announce these Innovation Roadshow series, phase 1 of which is what we have just concluded, and there are more to come, such that by the end of the administration, as Assistant Secretary Rivkin was saying, we've fanned out around at least 15 key cities in Asia with 3 objectives: highlighting our approach to entrepreneurship, engaging young entrepreneurs, and encouraging governments to make the necessary regulatory reforms to enable entrepreneurship. So that is the prelude. And then after that, we went in phase 1 to the countries listed. And let's now come to the postlude. The roadshow that we just embarked on leads into 4 other key priorities, 2 global and 2 almost you can think of as sub-regional. The first global one is the Global Entrepreneurship Summit that's coming up in June out in Stanford University. For those of you who are not familiar with this initiative, the idea for the summit was born out of a speech President Obama gave in Cairo in 2009 and has since morphed into an annual summit that convenes entrepreneurs from around the world that's been hosted by Turkey, Morocco, the UAE, Kenya, and this year it'll be here in the United States. This year we're going to have about 1,000 plus people in attendance. The President will speak, 700 entrepreneurs from 176 countries, and off that 700, 200 from Asia. And by Asia, I mean both East Asia, Southeast, and South. So obviously a clear focus on innovation, on entrepreneurship in Asia at this year's GES Summit. That's kind of in the postlude category, global priority 1. Number 2 is Select USA, which many of you may be familiar with, which is sort of the preeminent summit to attract investment into the United States. This year's summit is going to be held here in Washington in June, and the theme is Innovation Advantage. So once again, we have an economic priority and initiative that is built around that theme of innovation. So the roadshow, in a sense, flows into both of those global priorities that we have coming up. What I mean by sub-regional is two things. On the India front, in the last strategic and commercial dialogue that we held in India, what was announced was the idea of a US-India Innovation Forum. And it's apt that we're talking about this here at CSIS, because CSIS is in effect the secretariat for that forum, and Rick Rossa back there is the man who'll put it into action. But this is terrific. This forum basically is a way to, in a more systematic fashion, bring entrepreneurs from both sides, the US and India, together to find solutions to problems in our own economies, but also ones that we may be able to take to third countries, which was an interesting theme that constantly arose in our conversations as well. So the India Roadshow in our minds also fed into the India-US Innovation Forum, and the inaugural meeting of that will be held later this year. The ASEAN Roadshow that Ambassador Thorne left flows into a separate sort of sub-regional priority, which is US-ASEAN Connect. And for those of you who are not as familiar with that particular initiative, this was something that President Obama announced at the Sunnylands Special Leaders Summit held earlier this year. And essentially, he announced the fact that the U.S. would be setting up US-ASEAN Connect. And think of US-ASEAN Connect in two levels. One is a framework to capture all of our economic engagement in Southeast Asia. But then at the second level, it's anchored in a set of hubs that we will set up in the region at our mission to ASEAN in Jakarta, Bangkok, and Singapore. And what we're trying to create is a one-stop shop for U.S. companies trying to do business in Southeast Asia. What we're also trying to create is an actual physical network that will enable entrepreneurs in the region and here with the U.S. to connect, building on programs like YSEALI, the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative. So the prelude is essentially this vision the Secretary laid out for economic strategy in Asia. The roadshow that we just completed executes on that, and they flow into Select USA, GES at a global level, and in the India case, the US-India Innovation Forum, and in the ASEAN case, building out US-ASEAN Connect. So that's a sort of a larger macro frame to provide you with. And with that, I will stop, and we look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Special Representative Ziad Haider and Ambassadors Thorne and Rivkin. I think that was a great overview of what the initiative is that you're trying to present and what you've already been doing. I think we'll now pivot to questions from the audience. Please raise your hand and wait for a microphone after I identify you, and then please identify yourself and ask a question if you can. Please. Yeah, Thomas?
Hello, Thomas Yandel. I'm a Vietnam scholar and now a consultant in Vietnam. And I heard the questions about Vietnam, but I think it's applicable more broadly, and it's about policy bias. Ambassador Thorne said the Vietnamese government gets it. And I work with one of those incubators, and I think they get it up to there. But then there's a real policy bias. Actually, the State Department funds a document called the Provincial Competitiveness Index that came out last week. And it says, yet again, like every year, there is a huge policy bias for large businesses and for state-owned enterprises. And that really redirects, crowds out funding for small businesses, such as innovative businesses. And there's a large pessimism among small businesses in Vietnam because they can't get the money because of that government-led policy bias. So my question is, first of all, can you qualify maybe, because you said the government gets it, is this something you have been looking at? And secondly, what can the US government, what can your roadshow do to address that policy bias that then crowds out small businesses, which is so important for innovation, of course?
Good. I think that your comment asks for more a definition of what I meant by the government gets it. Certainly, we spent a lot of time with the Minister of Science and Technology, and they understand what it means to try to create what it even means to talk about an entrepreneurial environment, ecosystem. And in a way that I did not hear with any other policy people, ministers I met with in the other countries. That was encouraging because this is not easy to do. It is not something that is innately understood in any of these countries, and that and yet the young people are, as you allude, are very much focused on trying to get these kinds of businesses going. So, I think that if there's just somebody in the government that can begin to talk to the rest of the people in the government in that way, it's going to help it a great deal, not just a bunch of Americans coming in from the outside trying to tell them what to do. I think that there is a bias that you speak of. There's a bias in all these countries to go to state-owned enterprises and to go to large businesses because that's what they know. And I think that's, shall we say, the old guard. That is, they're doing what they sort of know. And this new kind of entrepreneurship environment is not all that well understood. But I think that, and by the way, I just also want to say that finding money is hard everywhere. Okay, it's hard here, even though there's a lot of money lying around for that. It's hard. It's certainly hard over there for kids who want to start, businesses to try to find angel investment, and particularly hard to try to ramp up, to scale up a business. That's the piece that is really not understood. There's also, I just want to also say that it really is a necessary distinction to be made between SME development and entrepreneurial development. It's an arbitrary distinction, but SME is the mom and pop shop, and there things like fintech, ease of starting a business, things like that really play a major role in just people getting those little businesses going. But when it comes to really starting a business with the idea of really scaling that into a unicorn or whatever it is, a little bit like that Gojek company I talked about, and that was in Indonesia, there are not that many enterprises that are doing that. And the country in many ways is not set up for it. There isn't enough educated, STEM-educated people in these various countries. The education systems are not really strong enough to support that robust, in a robust way, that kind of activity. But there is, I just can't emphasize enough in each one of these countries that there's these little incubators that are full of kids that are trying to figure this out. But Vietnam was the place that I saw the most, desire, or by at least part of the government, to create the environment that would help sustain this. So anyway, that's a long answer to what you're saying, but I think there's lots of room for improvement. But the energy to do this kind of stuff is really alive and well out there within these young populations.
Please.
Kevin Murphy, president of J. Austin Associates. We, for the State Department, fielded the first entrepreneur in residence abroad some years ago in Egypt. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Obama had mentioned the great things that were done in Egypt on entrepreneurship there. That same person is leading the Mekong Tigers now for the State Department in Southeast Asia. Mekong Tigers, Mike Ducker. And I was wondering how your program relates to Mekong Tigers, and which is an entrepreneurship initiative of the State Department, and how that's doing.
I must tell you that I've not met Mike Ducker. As a matter of fact, I'm not very informed about his efforts, so I can't really answer that. I do know that since I've been also quite involved in Egypt, that there is a fairly robust young community that is trying to get something going in Egypt. It's a very tough environment, as you can imagine. I did not run into Mekong Tigers, so I can't speak to it, but I'm not surprised. I mean, that kind of activity is going on. I'd like to know more about it.
Let me just add to what Ambassador Thorne said. We're identifying a new initiative in the American Innovation Roadshow, but it is not the State Department's innovation initiative. I can assure you that in every region of the State Department, there are deep, deep, deep entrepreneurial innovative activities. In fact, getting our arms around them has been quite a challenge because there are so many that exist. And that's a whole different topic. So they will link in when the roadshows are going through the regions where they are being presented. But each of our regional assistant secretaries is encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship in those areas. What's unique, I think, about this roadshow is the way that we are, connecting the communities, sharing what we do really well, which is innovation and entrepreneurship, with our friends and allies around the world, and connecting the two industries to strengthen bilateral and regional ties. So I want to learn more about that program. I don't know about it. But I promise you there are a couple hundred other programs at State that I haven't quite yet learned either, which is exciting for us,
Yeah. I'm surprised. I thought I had heard about them.
Ray Vickery from Albright Stonebridge. My question is for Ambassador Rivkin. In India, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of innovation incubators. And I'm sure you met with a lot of them, and there are a few that are successful, but by the Indian government's own assessment, most of them are really not up to standard and not productive. The question is, with the commitment of the Indian government and the U.S. government to try to help in regard to this situation, what is it that is most needed by these incubators, and how is it that the United States enters into helping fulfill that need?
Well, it's a fantastic question, and we met with a number of these incubators in the 4 cities that we went to, in Delhi and Gurgaon and Ahmedabad and Hyderabad. But as you say, there are many, many throughout the country. I was on a television show, Young Turks, with a number of amazing entrepreneurs, and you really get a visceral sense of the entrepreneurial culture when you're there and how much it is in common with us. But your question relates to a bigger and broader issue, which is policy, and that is what we do with New Delhi and with the state governments. What many of the entrepreneurs talked about is anybody that wants to invest in India or any nation around the world is going to look for transparency and predictability and the rule of law. And if you can't protect your intellectual property, then chances are you're not going to want to innovate in that country. And there are a number of innovation-friendly policy initiatives that we are working together with the Indian government on putting into place. I do find it fascinating. We had this debate at State the other day. Almost everywhere I travel, people say, we're going to build a Silicon Valley. And it's fascinating. I know some people that were charged to do that in Russia. I know when I was ambassador to France, they had something the French call pôle de compétitivité, which was they pulled together a center and they say, now this is going to be the entrepreneurial high-tech center. And it never really works. I mean, it's fine, but Silicon Valley grew organically. And it's the combination of access to capital with the educational institutions, with our regulatory policy and ease of investment, all working together in an organic manner that led us to, to the fact that I'd say a significant percentage of our $18 trillion economy is created by businesses that didn't exist 20 years ago. And that's largely because of our technological and innovative expertise. We are talking to the federal government about how to put in place countrywide policies that share our experiences that will promote innovation. We're talking to the state governments about doing the same. I will say one last thing, though, which is next time you go to India, you should definitely, in Hyderabad, go to see T-Hub, which is the largest incubator in the country, and it is pretty extraordinary. And I think that the success stories that we're hearing coming out of T-Hub in Hyderabad are much more akin to what you're seeing in Silicon Valley than anything else around. So we all can learn from each other, but I think there's enormous opportunity for the Indian people.
If I could just add a couple of points to that. There's a ton of energy in India right now, both at the top and at the bottom, around innovation. Prime Minister Modi has this initiative called Startup India. The government's looking from at Delhi level, setting up a fund to invest in entrepreneurs. So there's all this stuff happening at the top, campaign, slogans, funding. And then at the bottom you go and you meet all of these young entrepreneurs, and the policy, the issues that they're trying to tackle, neither the top-down or the bottom-up approach alone can work. It's going to have to be some sort of an intersection. But some of the issues at the bottom-up approach, at the sort of grassroots that struck me at least, were access to capital keeps on coming up. And what we were trying to point to with platforms like the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, where you have 300 investors as well, was opportunities to tap financing. Another issue that came up was how do we scale and actually market, because it's one thing to have an idea, it's another thing to build it out and sell it. So where do we get those lessons? A third thing that was quite interesting was even in places like Hyderabad that have a lot of US companies present, the big names, Googles and so on, one could say, oh, they're all set, they have it already. But a lot of the entrepreneurs there would say, we aren't really doing the cutting edge innovation here. We're part of the R&D effort, but the nature of the R&D and the nature of the innovative work happening, they wanted more of that action from the US companies. And then just a last point that I think was really interesting to discuss with entrepreneurs in the country was a cultural point, as Ambassador Thorne was also referring to, is starting a business and winding it down, or more largely the issue of failure. If it doesn't take off, how do you manage that? And asking these young entrepreneurs, you've gone off the road from being a lawyer, doctor, banker, the classic South Asian stereotype professions, to doing this, that's a bit of a risk. Is the cultural shift occurred for you to do that? And to kind of talk them through that, and to have entrepreneurs on our side be able to walk them through not just the successes, but the failures, and the fact that this is an iterative process. So those are some of the things at the bottom up that were, I think, interesting.
And to build on what Ziad just said, some of the states in India seem more willing to deal with failure than others. I mean, the Gujarat people were saying, this is what we do. It's a badge of honor. People in Silicon Valley who fail often get employed more than people who haven't failed, because if they've learned from their failure. But if you go to certain other countries around the world, failure means you won't get financing again. Failure means that you might as well just leave the country or change industries. And that culture of, that spirit of opportunity that exists in America doesn't exist everywhere. So sharing, as Ziad was saying, some of the success stories and ways that we've overcome that in America is very useful to these countries that we're speaking with.
I just, my two bits on this thing, and that is that, I think we're the government. We got to decide what we can do and what we don't do, and don't do well. And I think that's really something that we ought to be very clear-minded about. Like, we can't raise money. I mean, I think that that's up to the environment, the system. Kids got to go out there and peel money out of their parents or their friends, and just the way we have to do it here, in the same way. But I think we can encourage we can broadcast the way we do it, and the public diplomacy aspect of it, and we can lobby for a policy environments that help create a more sustainable environment for these kinds of activities to take place. And that includes education, big down these cultural differences we've talked about. But I think that's something we can, with the ministers, shine the light on. Hey, if you have inhibiting labor laws, or if it takes me 3 years to start a business in the country, you're just not going to even begin to get there. And that, I think, makes a huge difference. And at least that's where, at least I, and I believe my colleagues, have gotten to what we can do as part of trying to promote this kind of stuff around the world.
Good question. When you were in India...
Because we're being streamed, can you please take the microphone?
When you were in India, you heard of the organization called TIE, the Indus Entrepreneurs, started in Silicon Valley. And I opened the chapter in Boston and a couple in India also early on. How are they doing with the incubator over there, according to your experience when you were there? Because it's a global organization, we have it all over the world.
Sure. No, very familiar with TIE, terrific organization. We didn't intersect with them in our trip in India specifically, but I can just speak to a different aspect where we have very clearly intersected with them, which is that one of the things that the Economics Bureau at the State Department has done is set up what are called We Create centers that train women entrepreneurs around the world. Our most recent center that opened was in Pakistan. Actually, I'm sorry, it opened last year in Pakistan. And that's something that was opened by us as the government that we've handed over to TIE to run in Islamabad. So there is a good relationship there, but we didn't intersect with them in this particular trip.
Other questions? please.
Thank you very much. Yes, if I may, my name is Rita Herona Adkins, and I'm a freelance journalist. Yes, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to ask this question. And to shift the questions from very interesting dialogue on India to more or less the Southeast Asia part of the region. My curiosity, if I may sort of kind of try to express this convoluted question and curiosity, is that the presentation of Ambassador Thorne, which is to precisely establish the entrepreneurial kind of outlook in another culture, which may not necessarily have that, and also tying that up to Mr. Rivkin's emphasis precisely as a strategy to have clean energy as a basis for that entrepreneurial kind of dynamics and activities. Now, to the extent that I sort of know is that there are some, unfortunately, perhaps one can say, unavoidable roadblocks to the roadshow, if one can call it that, such as the impact of climate change, especially in island-formulated nations in Asia, like the Philippines and other parts, where the impact of climate change, inevitably, as experts are now saying, would precisely relate to the effort of entrepreneurial kind of activities to help the economic development and speed up the economic development of these particular countries, like specifically, for instance, the Philippines as an example. So that's my curiosity. And to boil down the question is that how does the roadshow insight sort of relates to that as a condition that has to be at the top level of your policy and program, culture-breaking kind of effort to establish entrepreneurship in Asia-Pacific region? Thank you.
Hi. There's some language you use that I would take a little, at least try to take some exception to, and that is that, we're trying not to foist something on another culture. I mean, we're trying to show the way that we do it, because all you do when you're out there is you feel these young people who are fascinated with creating their own self-determination, and they want to, they aspire to what we've tried to get done in this country, in the kinds of, not only the money that made, but the sense of independence and energy and teamwork and other kinds of things that they see. And so it is certainly supposed to be an aspirational example, not a didactic one. So I think that, that's one. And the second thing is that each environment, each country is going to have to meet their challenge due to their environment, their culture, and just how things work, what's important in those countries, the smells, the food, whatever else might be of particular shaping and has shaped that for over thousands of years, shall we say. And that's up to the young people of the country to figure that out. It's not for us to tell them. I think it's important to create networks. It's important to be able to share stories, success stories, failure stories, and that's the fabric of this kind of environment and the development of this environment. But what's really curious is to see how different cultures in different places solve these problems. I mean, I gave the example of Gojek. Here you got a terrible traffic problem in Jakarta. I mean, it's like it's mindless. You can't get through, and yet you can get on a motorcycle and get through, because someone has figured out that they can use the Uber solution to a motorbike. I found that pretty interesting, and we wouldn't have done it in this country, but they found a way to do it over there, and it's been a huge success. Now, I don't know how it fits culturally. I mean, it fits at least traffic-wise. But I think the wonderful thing about this model is that each place will discover its solutions, and the young people of both our worlds will be able to exchange ideas and learn from each other.
You mentioned clean tech, and just to add on to what Ambassador Thorne was saying, I heard Christine Lagarde on television recently saying that, in her opinion, climate change is the single greatest economic challenge of our time. And it's also, smart energy policy is clearly the solution to that challenge. And today in New York City, Secretary Kerry gave a speech where he said, clean energy is one of the greatest economic opportunities the world has ever seen. And he's saying that based on a number of things, including that $330 billion was invested in renewable energy last year alone. And what's interesting is that when you have, in the State Department, we're trying to build economic ties with our friends and allies around the world, and you have a friend like India in this case, who has a policy priority that's the same as ours in terms of prioritizing clean energy. But Prime Minister Modi wants 175 gigawatts by 2022. That is the biggest challenge you can imagine. The only way to get there is through innovation and entrepreneurship and thinking out of the box and thinking differently and putting our two cultures together so that we can solve a problem that, that benefits both of us and the world is a worthy focus for this particular roadshow in India, and that's why we chose it. Please.
I'm in trouble.
I had the honor, I'm Susie Armstrong from Qualcomm. I had the honor of joining Ambassador Thorne in Indonesia and Vietnam. And one thing that struck me there, and that I believe happens here in the U.S., is I call universities the ultimate incubators. And I'm very curious, in a country like India, with such an advanced secondary education system and university education system, what was, Ambassador Rivkin, what was your view of the technology transfer, the health of that ecosystem, if you will? Is it present in India? Is it a big contributor to intellectual property, et cetera?
The institutions are extraordinary. I went to the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. It was in Ahmedabad.
And in Hyderabad,
ISB, and it was considered one of the best business schools in the world. And we went to a number of incubators that were attached to these institutions and benefiting from the ideas and the energy and the funding in a way that I found quite impressive. So, in my opinion, I think it was absolutely transferring, as you say. But I'm curious, Ziad, what your take was.
No, that's right. I mean, I think it did come up frequently, as Assistant Secretary Rivkin mentioned, that people would ask us, what does it take to have a Silicon Valley? And one of the themes that we did draw out is that intersection of, university academic settings, obviously entrepreneurs, business coming together. Now, just the fact that you're situated at university is helpful, but that isn't, the silver bullet into itself. So it was certainly an enabling environment. On IP, we would frequently raise that issue. And it's no secret there's some IP issues that we have with India. On the other hand, there are many areas where we do see eye to eye as well, one of which relates to sort of the entertainment industry side of things. So IP was a great issue to openly discuss with entrepreneurs and ask them how do they view protecting the hard work that they do to build out a particular product. If I could just take the opportunity to just make one other point. I mean, we're focusing on a particular region, we're focusing on a theme of innovation, but embedded in all of this is sort of an innovation in the way we try to actually do commercial diplomacy, so to speak. So that's a larger point than just this roadshow. The idea of U.S. government taking out businesses is not revolutionary. I mean, oftentimes chambers of commerce will go out and U.S. officials will go with them. But the idea of going out with business, trying to engage at a subnational level, trying to engage at the different stratas of society, not just government, but business, entrepreneurs, media, was a really interesting hybrid approach to how we could potentially be doing our commercial diplomacy in a more adept way. We're not a state-controlled economy. We don't direct our companies. what to do. We wouldn't want to. They're doing just fine without that steer. But I think it was a very powerful partnership, and that's part of why we're excited to replicate it in other parts of Asia and, frankly, in other parts of the world, in a sense, extending beyond an Asia Innovation Roadshow alone.
So the last question, Ben, the woman back there.
Hi, Diana Friedman with International Technology and Trade Associates. I understand that the State Department's role is generally to promote more outward-facing foreign investment, while the Department of Commerce and Select USA are more responsible for inward FDI. But I was hoping to hear more about how the State Department initiatives that the panel has been discussing incorporate Select USA and Select USA's mission to promote inward FDI. Thank you.
Well, let me just say on that question that having served as an ambassador, and Ambassador Thorne, I think, would agree with this as well, that the embassies abroad, which work for the State Department, are the most important, in my opinion, factors in driving people into the Select USA program. Our ambassadors around the world are challenged by state and commerce to bring home companies and introduce them to this one-stop shop that we have that's housed at Commerce but is deeply integrated into the State Department. It's something we do with the Commerce Department but is highly dependent on our economic officers abroad in every country in the world, and our chiefs of mission, our ambassadors who operate under chief mission authority by the President of the United States to consolidate the interagency at post, meeting with businesses at the highest levels, and sending them home. So in our opinion, the State Department plays an enormous role in job creation. And I think the role that our ambassadors and our embassies played in this, not only in inward investment, but in generating jobs in America, is not really that well known. So I'm glad you asked the question, because it's something that we do every day and something that we prioritize to our ambassadors in the field every single day to make sure that it's the top of their agenda.
And just to add to that, I mean, as Ambassador Rivkin said, absolutely. So states intimately involved, our mission on the ground. I'll be out in China next week, where I'll be talking about Select USA as well and welcoming Chinese investment, obviously, into the U.S. as well. In this particular roadshow, talking to entrepreneurs, they're not exactly the target audience for investment in the U.S. The reason I referred to Select USA was because the specific theme for this year is innovation advantage of investing in the U.S., the benefit for a foreign investor to capitalize on the R&D environment we have here. So in a sense, it's a larger policy priority of showcasing innovation. The roadshow is taking it out there. Select USA is for people coming here. So that's the two sides of that coin.
But I'm sorry, David, one last follow-up before you go is to say that I want to clarify one point, and that is it isn't state versus commerce. I think that we have probably the best relationship with commerce we've had in a long, long time, thanks to the leadership of Secretary Kerry and Secretary Pritzker. Our Econ and FCS, Foreign Commercial Service teams abroad, are working seamlessly. I swore in our ambassador to Bahrain, who is the FCS, the Foreign Commercial Service chief in Beijing. It is our relationships at every level of commerce are fantastic. And the outside world shouldn't look at us that way. We need to be one government helping American businesses abroad and drawing high-paying jobs into the United States together. And I think we've made great strides in this administration.
Just one thing, and that is that one more thing, and just to emphasize Charlie's point, which is that, you know, most of our jobs in this country are affected by what's going on outside of this country. And it's really important to understand that, you know, part of our mission, if you will, to create shared prosperity out in the world is, in fact, to create a more robust environment that will help our economy. And not to lose that sense that we're in a globalized world and things out there really have a big impact, more than 50% on the jobs that are created in this country. So it's you know, it's very synergistic in that sense, and I think that that's one of the reasons why we want to emphasize this economic environment, economic vector to our foreign policy. I'll just end with that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Thorne, Assistant Secretary Rivkin, and Special Representative Haider for joining us here today. It was very informative and interesting discussion. So stay tuned. I would like to keep watching what you do down the road. So please join me in thanking our guests. Thank you.